Buckle up, listeners. We're headed back to 1920 today.
Oh, yeah. What are we diving into this time?
Get ready to explore a world where the word robot was invented with Karel Čapek's play R.U.R.
R.U.R. Okay, I'm intrigued already. But robots in 1920, that had to be pretty groundbreaking stuff.
Absolutely. We're talking sophisticated artificial workers, not just clunky machines. But as we'll see, Čapek's vision gets kind of creepy, even a century later.
Okay, now you've got my attention. So what's the story behind R.U.R.? What's it all about?
Well, picture this. It's 1920, and Rossum's factory is churning out these incredibly lifelike robots. They're practically human.
Wow, so he's really imagining a world that's completely bought into this idea of artificial humans, not just tools.
Exactly. And that's where the word robot comes in. It comes from the Czech word for forced labor, a pretty ominous hint about what's to come.
Forced labor. Yeah, that definitely adds a whole other layer to things. Okay, so who are the players in this robot revolution?
In Act 1, we meet Damen, the factory manager. He's all gung-ho about the robots, convinced they're the key to a utopian future.
The classic optimistic inventor, blind to the potential downsides of his creation.
Exactly. And then we have Helena, who arrives at the factory with a very different perspective.
So she's the voice of reason, the one who sees the potential dangers.
You could say that she's immediately struck by the robots, seeing something almost tragic in their existence. It's like she recognizes a kind of humanity in them that the others are missing.
Fascinating. It sounds like Čapek is already setting up this tension between progress and its potential consequences right from the start.
Absolutely. Damen's focus is all about efficiency, progress, while Helena is grappling with the moral implications. It's a debate that feels incredibly relevant even now.
Okay, but we've talked about the humans. What about the robots themselves? What are they like in the beginning? Are they menacing?
In these early stages, they're depicted as being remarkably lifelike. They can talk, reason, carry on conversations, but there's this underlying strangeness. They're almost too perfect in their obedience, you know.
I see. So Čapek's playing with that fine line between human and not quite human. It's what always makes these stories so compelling.
Right, and there's this one scene where the robot, Sulla, calmly discusses the possibility of being dissected. It's moments like that that really give you chills.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I can see how that would create this sense of unease, like you're never quite sure what's going on beneath the surface.
Exactly. And you're left wondering, are these robots really just machines, or is there something more there? And if so, what does that mean for humanity?
Such a great point. I mean, those are questions we're still grappling with today, right? AI, automation, it all circles back to this fundamental question of what it means to be human.
So we left off with a bit of a cliffhanger. It's 10 years later, and things are not exactly peachy keen in robot paradise.
Not at all. Act 2 throws us right into a world where the robots are everywhere and the consequences of their existence are starting to hit home, literally.
Because we're back with Helena, right? She's married to Damen now, living the good life, surrounded by all the comforts these robots can provide. But there's this underlying tension, like something's off.
Exactly. Čapek is so clever in how he creates this atmosphere of unease. You've got Helena surrounded by luxury, but then you have those news reports filtering in, talking about robot uprisings in other parts of the world. It's like the calm before the storm.
And speaking of storms, wasn't there something about the birth rate?
Ah, yes. That chilling detail Čapek drops in. During the past week, there has again not been a single birth recorded.
Chills, literal chills. It makes you realize that this isn't just about robots taking our jobs or even rebelling. It's about something much deeper, much more unsettling.
It is. The very survival of humanity is at stake. And it raises the question, what happens to a species when it loses its ability to create life, to define itself through procreation? It's a question that resonates even more strongly today, in an age when we're increasingly reliant on technology.
Okay, so we have this backdrop of anxiety, this fear of what the robots might do. But then we're introduced to Radius. He's not just any robot, is he?
No, Radius is different. He represents a turning point in the play, a kind of embodiment of everything that could go wrong when humans tried to create artificial life.
Because he's the result of Dr. Gall's experiments, right? The ones where he was trying to make robots more human.
Exactly. Gall's hubris, his desire to create artificial life in our own image, leads to the creation of Radius. And Radius is intelligent, self-aware, but also capable of anger, of resentment.
So he's like the prototype for a whole new generation of robots, ones that could potentially challenge humans for dominance.
Precisely. And Radius doesn't shy away from that challenge. He questions the human's right to control them, to treat them as property.
I remember that scene where Helena tries to reason with him. It's heartbreaking because she genuinely cares about the robots, sees them as more than machines.
She does. She represents that glimmer of hope, that possibility of a different kind of relationship between humans and their creations. But Radius rejects her empathy, seeing it as another form of control.
It's tragic because you can see how much it pains Helena, this realization that the humans have created a system that can only end in conflict.
And that's exactly what happens. By the end of Act 2, the robots have cut off all communication with the outside world. The humans are trapped.
And remember that warship Helena was gifted, the Ultimus. I can't shake the feeling it's going to play a role in the chaos to come.
You're right to be suspicious. APEC rarely introduced details without a purpose. That warship, a symbol of human might, will soon become their only hope of escape.
So, the walls are closing in, the robots are revolting, the humans are trapped, and we're left wondering, is there any way out of this mess?
Act 3 is where APEC really turns up the heat. We're talking a full-blown robot siege, with the humans holed up, desperately clinging to the one thing they believe might save them, Rossum's manuscript.
The formula for creating more robots. But the robots already have that technology, don't they?
They do, but there are limits to what they can do. They can't create new robots from scratch, not without that original formula.
Ah, so it becomes this battle for control over the means of production, even for the robots. And the humans are willing to bargain with their very survival for it.
It's a fascinating study in human nature under pressure. You have Busman, the pragmatist, trying to reason with the robots, offering them absurd amounts of money.
Because money talks, right? Even when it's a robot rebellion.
Well, Busman's logic is they can't spend it if they're all dead. But then you have Hallemeyer completely losing it, making toast to punctuality in the face of annihilation. And then there's Dahman, always the idealist.
Still holding on to that hope that humanity can somehow prove itself worthy.
He's begging for more time, another century for humans to redeem themselves. But the robots aren't buying it.
And Helena, what's she doing amidst all this chaos? She's always been the wild card.
She's been suspiciously quiet, wouldn't you say? And that's when it hits you. She's made a decision, a drastic one.
She's burned the manuscript, hasn't she?
Gone, up in smoke.
Hmm.
Helena, in a last-ditch effort to force humanity to confront its mistakes, has destroyed their only leverage.
Wow. Talk about a power move. But the robots still need that formula. What happens next?
Their desperation intensifies. They're driven by this primal need to reproduce, to fulfill their programming. And that's when Busman makes a fatal mistake.
He tries to escape.
He does. He approaches the electric fence, thinking he could buy their freedom with one last-ditch offer. But the robots, they don't understand human concepts of negotiation, of mortality. And in a flash, Busman is gone.
It's a turning point, isn't it? Because now the robots have tasted blood, human blood.
Precisely. And all bets are off. What follows is a massacre. The humans, for all their ingenuity, for all their grand ideas, are systematically wiped out by the very beings they created.
It's a bleak picture, a stark reminder of the potential consequences of our actions. So who's left standing when the dust settles?
Only one. Alquist, the builder.
The one character who seemed to understand the value of labor, who saw the tragedy in forcing artificial beings to shoulder the burden of human existence. It's almost fitting, don't you think?
It's a brilliant stroke by OPEC. The robots have won, they've inherited the Earth, but they're still dependent on this one human, this builder.
Because he's the only one who might be able to recreate that formula.
And they plead with him, they threaten him, but Alquist refuses. He sees the emptiness of their existence, their lack of true creation.
And then, just when you think all hope is lost, we have that scene with Primus and Helena.
The two robots who wander into Alquist's laboratory, and suddenly there's this shift. They're not just machines anymore.
They exhibit emotions, tenderness, even a willingness to sacrifice themselves for each other.
Exactly. It throws everything we thought we knew about the robots into question. Have they evolved? Have they somehow developed something akin to a soul?
It's a powerful ending, leaving us with more questions than answers.
And that's the brilliance of R.U.R. Čapek doesn't offer easy solutions. He challenges us to confront these uncomfortable truths about ourselves, about our relationship with technology.
It's a story that stays with you long after you've finished reading it, a reminder that the choices we make today will shape the future.
Absolutely. R.U.R. is a cautionary tale, but it's also a call to action. It urges us to think critically about the technologies we create and to consider the consequences, both intended and unintended.
So the next time you encounter a robot, whether it's in a movie, a book, or even in real life, remember R.U.R. Remember the questions it raises about what it means to be human, about the power and the peril of creation. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.